folks, Dr. Mike Nutritional here for RP Plus, Renaissance Periodization, RP University. Lecture 1 in our course in Nutrition for Fat Loss, how to get lean through a nutritional approach. Lecture 1 is Intro and Basic Principles. Super important to make sure we have everything framed properly, understand the real basics of stuff, so once we get into the details, everything makes sense in context. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about what fat loss aims to do, the mechanisms of fat loss, the reasons and benefits behind losing fat, some trade-offs and downsides of losing fat, so it's actually not all rosy, general nutrition approaches. We're going to talk about the rest of the lecture, typical time courses of how long fat loss takes, because there's a lot of mythology there about how quickly you can lose fat or how long it has to take, and then we're going to talk about what our next lecture is going to look like. So let's get right into it. What is the aim of fat loss? It's really straightforward. It's to reduce the amount of adipose or fat tissue that you have, right? And this effect is usually usually happens by making individual fat cells smaller. You know, fat cell holds this much fat, you reduce it in size, it holds less, and then externally you look leaner because you are leaner. We're not burning fat cells. We're not killing fat cells. We are not turning fat into muscle. How come that's impossible? Well, it's two different kinds of organs. You can no more turn fat into muscle than you can turn your liver into your kidneys. It's a good shot if you succeed. You have a Nobel Prize coming your way. Here's the thing. Some people say, okay, we can't turn fat into muscle technically, but can't we do recomposition where we gain muscle, lose fat at the same time, and lean out, but not really change our body weight or our body size? Beginners can do this relatively well. But for more advanced individuals, or if you really want to put your best foot forward and lose as much fat as you can, recomposition is not something to gamble on because it's a very inefficient process. As you get more and more advanced, as you get leaner, recomposition is worse and worse and worse, and at some point just takes an almost infinite amount of time. So it's better to have dedicated phases of fat loss where we know muscle growth won't be that great, and then dedicated phases of muscle gain where we know could gain a little bit of extra fat. Alternate those. That's the best way forward as opposed to trying to sort of do everything at the same time. Now, what is the aim of fat loss outside of just, losing the fat? I mean, it's clearly for a purpose. Well, there's a couple purposes. One is that we can focus on performance outcomes. We can get higher jumps. We can run faster if we lose fat. Totally works. As a matter of fact, endurance hugely improves if fat is reduced. So if you're, let's say, a grappler or something like that, or a boxer, and you lose 10 pounds of body fat, your endurance is going to go through the roof. Next, probably one of those obvious ones is just to be focused on a certain physique. You want a certain look. You want to be leaner, period, for its own sake. Next, you can be focused on health. Blood work improves when you lose fat almost every single time. As a matter of fact, one of the most obvious, the most simple, the most straightforward, and the most reliable ways to improve your health, if you're at a healthy body weight and a normal body fat, is to get leaner. If you're at a higher body fat, it's a no mystery deal. I mean, straightforward. Losing fat improves almost every fact about your health, unless you're getting super, super lean or super, super skinny, which is super rare, right? Lastly, you could be doing it to focus on lifestyle change. What does that mean? Well, if you're tired of getting into and out of cars, you guys know, some of you that have been heavier, I've been much heavier myself, getting into a car and getting out of a car is tough when you weigh north of 250 pounds. And sometimes you're just tired of not fitting in airplane seats and just lumbering around, your feet hurt. You're maybe just fine health-wise, and you maybe don't super care about how you look, and you look fine, you think. But if you lose 10, 15, 20 pounds of fat, you could just make your life easier. You sleep better, you move around better, things fit better. It can be a super great thing. All of those are valid reasons. Heck, you can even do a couple of them at the same time. But just so you know where people are coming from fat loss, all super valid. Right. Now, how does fat loss work as far as basic mechanisms? Well, we can just take a sort of biochemical approach at this. The FSR is the fractional synthetic rate of fat tissue. That's how fast fat is built. And the fractional breakdown rate, FBR, is the degree to which fat is lysed, to which it is degraded, to which it is broken down. And it's really quite simple. If the rate of fat building is higher than the rate of fat breakdown, you're going to incrementally get fatter over time. If the rate of fat breakdown is higher than the rate of fat building, you are going to get incrementally leaner over time. Really, really straightforward. It's pretty close to as simple as that. The rest is really just details. Now, what contributes to a higher fractional breakdown rate of fat will contribute to fat burning? First, it's just the general metabolism to keep you alive. Like if you stop moving altogether, when you eat very little food, you're going to lose weight and you're going to lose fat. How come? Well, most of your body's processes, most of the energy that is required for you just goes to keeping you alive, like operating your sodium potassium pumps and a whole other stuff, keeping your heart beating, that sort of thing. Important stuff, right? Your general metabolism takes quite a few calories, resting metabolic rate, basal metabolic rate, estimate that pretty well. But that's not it. Your daily activity, or what's known as your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the amount of times you will walk to the fridge and back, the amount of times you mess around with your house and try to clean stuff. When you're at work, how often you walk back and forth, how much you fidget even if you walk instead of taking the bus, that sort of thing. NEAT is not necessarily intentional exercise. You're not trying to burn calories, but just moving around doing your daily tasks throughout the day, and even just being fidgety can burn a ton of calories and is the next biggest source of calorie burning. Of course, after that, the last source really is intentional exercise. Like, yeah, you can get on the treadmill or the bike or something and do some hard training. That's totally cool. Weightlifting certainly counts there. It doesn't burn a whole lot of calories. It does burn some. And lastly, sort of an addendum to this, adequate sleep and lower stress literally allow fat to be liberated and allow all of these sources of fat burning to be maxed out. That if you're high stressed, in many cases, especially if you're underslept, fat loss is really, really inhibited. On the other hand, what are the contributors, the main ones, to lower fat building? Here, there's really just one: calorie intake control. Macronutrients matter a little bit, but really fundamentally, it's all about calories. If you eat 2,500 calories a day and you're not losing any weight, and you switch to eating 2,000 calories a day and you start losing weight, congratulations, you are now eating few enough calories for there to be a difference in FBR and FSR, and now all of a sudden you're losing fat. It's really basically that simple. So essentially, you want to move more somehow, probably, or through some combination, eat less, or at least one or the other of the two. Both is usually the best way. In order for your muscle to stay on your body, you probably want to train with weights. We'll get to that eventually, and eat protein, okay, sufficient protein so that your muscles don't fall off. Because, this could be basic mechanisms of weight loss if we didn't mention the protein in the weight training. Protein and weight training make sure it's fat loss and not muscle loss nearly as much as we want. And really, the rest is just details. It's really just about that straightforward. So basically, move plenty, move enough, eat not too much, eat plenty of protein and resistance train, and then the rest is really just details. And if you get all these equations pretty right, which is not that hard to do, you lose fat. All right. So what are some of the reasons and benefits of fat loss? We talked about motivations, but let's talk about what some consequences are. So good things about fat loss. If you lose fat, you become faster almost always, especially within a general range of non-extremes. You become faster. You become more agile. You're literally quicker. You become more endurant. So your endurance goes up like crazy. You'll notice the number of marathon winners that are over fat is 0. Okay. You become more flexible and mobile. Sometimes stuff's just literally in the way, right? And if you're leaner, you become way more flexible, way more mobile, and that's better for 50 different kinds of sports. It's better for your posture, long-term health, so on and so forth. You become more explosive. You can jump higher, you can move quicker under load, and it makes you better just about every kind of sport that you want. You become less injury prone when you lose fat because you're moving around, your joints are being loaded by this backpack of fat that you have all the time. You take fat away, as long as it's not super crazy, way too lean, which we'll talk about later, you become less prone to injury. You become healthier by a long shot. You literally feel better all the time. Your sleep improves. Your feet don't hurt as much when you walk, so on and so forth. And last but not least, your aesthetics are enhanced, so you may look a bit more like what you'd want, and it could improve your self-esteem, confidence, and other people might like how you look, and so on and so forth. So tons and tons of benefits of fat loss, but as always, there are trade-offs to everything. So let's talk about the trade-offs and downsides of fat loss. 2 specific situations. One is too much time spent losing fat, so losing way too much in a certain amount of time, or the second one is getting too lean on an absolute scale. We'll talk about that one in a sec. First, if you spend too much time losing fat, especially sequentially in a row, like 16 weeks of 2 pounds of weight loss per week, you get a couple of very predictable things. One, you risk becoming super, super fatigued. So goodbye sport performance, weight training performance, all goes down the drain, and your life sucks, right? Because you're so fatigued all the time, you can barely do all your daily tasks, and certainly not enjoy them. Next, you become weaker because you lose muscle, you lose the energy to power that muscle and power the nervous system. So you become weaker, which is really bad for almost everything. And of course, less muscle is the next one. The weakness happens though through energy, unavailability at any one time, and of course, muscle loss over the long term, so less muscle. You become weaker, but the less muscle thing is independently a thing because, you probably don't want to look like a super skinny person who looks sick. Like a lot of times, people do a fat loss diet, but they don't do the muscle conserving part, and they go too fast to their crash diet. And people are like, hey, you look kind of sick. Are you okay? And you're like, no, damn it, I'm not sick. I just lost a bunch of fat. They're like, oh, sorry, just looking out, right? You don't necessarily want to end up looking like, Willem Dafoe or something like that. No offense, Willem Dafoe, you're one of my favorite actors. When you lose fat, you get all super gaunt. You don't want that. And you lose muscle, you sort of, your limbs kind of look like, stuff's falling off. Not great, but if you go slower, more measured approach, you don't lose muscle, you look shapely, you look strong, you look fit, all that good stuff. Because you're weaker, you have less strength, less power, less speed, less endurance, which is real bad. So if you spend way too much time losing fat for a marathon race or something, you can actually be hurting your training, becoming less endurant. During the time that you're losing fat, and especially after, you get crazy rebound hunger. Like you can eat the kitchen sink, and that kind of feeling can persist for weeks and weeks and weeks, which can rebound a lot of your fat gains right back. You can have a lowered non-exercise activity thermogenesis for a while, a lowered NEAT, which means like during the time that you're losing the fat, it becomes incrementally harder to lose weight because you just move less. Like you choose to take the bus a little bit more than walking. You're going to change the channel on the TV, but you're so tired not of it that you're just like, whatever, I'll just watch this. You're less fidgety. You guys notice sometimes like you talk to someone on the phone and instead of sitting in one place, you pace around, you use your hands, you're really animated. If you're over dieted, then you might sit and talk to someone on the phone and just kind of stay pretty monotone and not say a whole lot. And actually, this happens all the time. Sometimes you actually become less social when you're super over dieted. You stop talking on the phone much at all. So people call you and you look at the phone and you're like, I don't have energy for this right now. And you just sit there. That lowers your calorie intake, making fat loss even harder. You have to cut food even more, which magnifies the problem. Positive feedback loop that goes straight to hell. And of course, that means you have a difficulty of losing more weight, which is what you sort of wanted. And it's a really, really bad deal, chance of rebounding weight. And of course, if you take this to really crazy extremes, you can develop some disordered eating patterns. Nothing good over here, right? So we have to make sure that if we lose fat, and we'll talk about this in time courses later, we're not doing it too much at a time or for too long. Next up, what's the problem with getting too lean? So if you try to sustain under 13% in most cases for a female, and for a male under 7%, what can you risk? Well, you can risk worsening health, especially for females that need higher fat levels to keep up normal levels of reproductive hormones. On that note, you can get reproductive disturbances. If you're a male below 7%, in most cases, your sex drive is going to be down to what the hell is sex anyway. And if you're female, your sex drive may change, but the reproductive disturbances for you actually more serious than sex drive because you will stop being fertile in the technical sense. You will go into amenorrhea. You will not have periods anymore and ovulation will stop. That's a real bad deal. So, if you are super, super lean for a little bit, that's okay. But if it's for years and years, that actually causes bone problems for females and a lot of other bad stuff. And then a lot of times, people who want to get that lean are athletes and they're trying to gain muscle and strength in the grand scheme. If you stay too lean for too long as a female or a male, that hormonal environment can lead to a lot of trouble gaining muscle and strength. So some people, they're at 7% body fat and someone's like, hey, you're trying to get bigger. And they're like, yeah, totally. And they're like, okay, well, you're going to gain a little body fat. And they're like, no, I just want to stay this lean. And the thing is, staying that lean can actually be bad for muscle gains. So not all is rosy. Basically, losing fat is super good if you have the fat to lose and it's not going to make you too lean, or if you can lose the fat for a short time, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then go back, totally fine. Or if you don't screw things up by dieting for way too long or losing way too much weight at once. But in general, fat loss is really good for you. You just have to make sure you're not doing anything stupid, which people do all the time, as you may imagine. All right. So what are the general nutritional approaches that we'll talk about in their own sections that are going to get us to where we need to go? Well, first, super simple, hypocaloric diet. Eating fewer calories than you burn results in tissue loss. Eating enough protein will make sure that most of the tissue lost isn't muscle, it's actually fat. Really good. Eating enough carbs and enough fats to support your muscle and performance so that you can keep the muscle tissue on, keep the energy to keep the calorie burn going, so on and so forth. So not trying to starve. We're not trying to cut all the carbs for no reason. We're still athletes. We still want to perform. Reasonable timing. right? Like if you don't eat for like 8 hours at a time and then you eat a bunch of food, you know, you're going to lose some muscle there that probably you won't get back, or at least until you start gaining weight again. So if you do intermittent fasting, it's okay. It's a fine way to lose fat, but you might be risking a little bit more muscle loss, especially if you're advanced. So just some reasonable timing, you know, at least 4 meals per day, evenly spread with plenty of protein. After that, it becomes less important. Some food composition considerations, which are really important in hunger management, for example. So can you diet on whey protein, pure sugar, and olive oil? Yeah, probably, but you have one of those shakes, and then like 2 hours later, you're going to be starving. But if you have, you know, grilled chicken breast, a bunch of fruits and veggies, which tend to digest for a very long time and keep you super full, and maybe some almonds, which have been shown to really just not, they knock out hunger pretty quick, and they don't really cause a lot of weight gain because people really overeat almonds. And if you do that kind of food, you know, good healthy food that's slow digesting and that is very anti-hunger, then you can potentially just not be as hungry. And that's really super awesome because it can enhance your adherence. And we'll get to that, why that's important in a second. Lastly, on the main principles, some supplements help, specifically stimulants. We'll get to that towards the end of the series. And of course, keeping proper hydration is good for a variety of reasons. It's a super small priority. Remember, the RP Diet 2.0 diet priority pyramid, the hypocaloric diet is by far the most important. Eating enough protein, carbs, and fats. Secondly, timing, so on and so forth. Supplements, very, very, very small effect, and so is hydration. All right. Now, here's the important thing. Consistency actually underpins all of these things. When we say consistency, we mean consistency in maintaining a hypocaloric diet, consistency in eating enough protein, carbs, and fats, consistency in keeping reasonable timing. How consistent you are will reflect exactly to what you actually apply, right? You can think of consistency as how many bullets you're actually loading into a gun. Right? Like if you're shooting zombies with a 30-round clip, you use 30 zombies and you're a real good shot. If you load 30 rounds, you'll kill 30 zombies. But if you load 25 rounds, even though you press the trigger, you know, like 30 times, only 25 bullets are going to come out and only 25 zombies are going to, it's better than 30 zombies, but still you got 5 zombies to try to beat in the back of the head with your, you know, buttstock or something like that. So essentially, consistency is, you know, you can have the best plan in the world, right? You can have the best zombie aim in the world, but you actually have to load your gun and do what you're supposed to do to get what you're supposed to get done. And promises and hopes and dreams don't count. It's actually what you do. Now, a corollary of consistency, or really an expansion of that principle, is actually 2 different kinds of consistency. There's frequency consistency and magnitude consistency. Frequency consistency on a fat loss diet means, did you eat the meals when you were supposed to, right? Potentially the answer is yes, right? Like I haven't missed a single meal in 6 weeks and everything on time. Or, you know, I've been on my diet every single day. That's another kind of measure of frequency. Every single day I've been on my diet, you know, or I've been on my diet for, you know, 6 out of the last 7 days. It's a pretty good frequency, right? You would think. But frequency alone doesn't tell you everything. For example, you could have a frequency of, let's say you have a 500 calorie per day deficit, and you have a frequency of hitting, you know, every single meal but one per week, like exactly how you're supposed to with calories, macros, so on and so forth. That's when magnitude consistency comes into play. That's the second kind of consistency. Magnitude consistency is when you are inconsistent. How inconsistent are you? So let's zoom in on that one meal. We have a whole week of meals that are perfect, on track, but we have one meal on Friday night for this particular individual example, in which the frequency, so the frequency of eating is incredible. There's just one little error, which is like, you know, you'd think pretty good. But let's say that meal has 4,000 total calories in it, because it's like a pizza and fries on top of the pizza, and you pour some ranch dressing on it. Sounds pretty good, actually. So let's say it's this huge, crazy, crazy meal. All right. That's potentially a problem. But you say, gee, it's one meal, right? And I'm sure a lot of you watching yourselves, and many of the clients you work with and people you help, you ask, hey, how good have you been on your diet? You try to say to yourself, how good have I been on my diet? And say, well, you know, pretty good. You know, I've just like, gee, I've only missed like one meal. I've only like messed up one meal. I've been real good last week. Well, that's a frequency consistency analysis. What about the magnitude consistency? You say, okay, so when you were off plan, what did you do? Like, there's a big difference between being off plan by 500 calories by eating a couple of cookies. Okay. That means if we have a 500 calorie per day deficit every day, and then at one meal it's 500 plus, then you basically just cancel out one day. all right. Like, not the end of the world, but basically you have like, 6 days, right, of 500 calorie deficit. That's losing almost a pound per week. Not quite a pound like you could have if you didn't have those cookies, but pretty damn close. How about this, though, the earlier example? 4,000 calories of cheat food, which people do all the time, right? Like tiny little females can do that kind of stuff if they're starved to the bone enough or just lack willpower enough, enough adherence. That 4,000 calories, it's 3,500 calories extra on top of what we're supposed to have. That means every single 500 calorie deficit you have per day for the week is filled in with its own 500 calorie cheat just from that one day. The total deficit of that diet is 0. How much weight are you going to lose on that diet? Nothing. You literally won't lose any weight. Put another way, you're dieting 6.75 days of the week. To do what? For no reason at all. You might as well just eat a normal diet and lose no weight and just never have to suffer, but you're suffering for the whole week to cancel everything out with one mega cheat meal. So when we talk about consistency, it's important to keep in track, especially if you work with clients, especially if you talk to individuals, try to help them with their diets. You got to analyze their frequency consistency, ask them how often they're on the plan, right? And analyze their magnitude consistency. When they're off the plan, how big of a deal is it? Now, people lie about this kind of stuff, and they lie to themselves, and they're poor tracking, but at least you can get some kind of feel for it just talking to your clients. For example, the worst case scenario, someone who frequently cheats with a super high magnitude. That's really bad. They're going to be hypercaloric. They're going to gain weight. Happens all the time. Next is a high frequency of off-plan eating, high frequency inconsistency, but the magnitude of consistency isn't really that bad. So there's people like, have an extra half a cookie here and there, an extra piece of like carrot or something. Not the end of the world, although if it's a really high frequency, it can add up to, again, most people will gain weight like that, but they can maintain their weight or the weight loss is just way slower. Lastly, we have, or you can have also like, high magnitude but really low frequency. Once every 2 weeks they have a cheat meal, can still block a whole lot of fat loss. And if it's once a week, they can just block all of it. Ideally, you want both as low as possible. So let's say once a week they have something off plan, but it's like an extra cookie. They're going to lose weight just fine. They're going to lose fat like crazy. It's not a super big concern. Ideally, would they not have the cookie? Sure. Right? Because also you have one cookie, it can make you crave others, so on and so forth. But if you just stick to that, it's totally fine. So you want both kinds of consistency to be in place. And consistency we usually talk about on the course of days and a week here and there. Duration of the diet is really also important. So if you want to get super lean, but you're only willing to diet for 3 weeks at a time, it's not enough time to lose a whole lot of weight. Duration multiplies the effect of consistency. So how do you lose weight? You do all these principles like we described. You do them consistently in both frequency and in intensity, frequency and in magnitude. And then you multiply that consistency by doing a duration of diet that's meaningfully long, 8 to 12 weeks. If you stick to a 10-week diet super, super well, and it has all these other things, you're going to lose fat, and there's not going to be any mystery about it. Almost all problems with fat loss are not physiological in nature. They're not nutritional mysteries. They come down to messing up the principles. More often, the principles are just fine or good enough, and it's the consistency that's a problem, frequency, magnitude, both, and or the duration isn't high enough. That's basically what it comes down to. Now, on the note of duration, what are the typical time courses? Well, first of all, the first week is almost all water weight loss. So don't get used to that number on the scale moving down like that. People say, I lost 6 pounds my first week. Next week, if you lose 2, you'll be lucky. All right, because a lot of it's, you lose intramuscular glycogen. You've been eating like crap, so you have, more salt intake. As soon as you clean up your diet, you have less salt intake, less glycogen, and all of a sudden you lose a lot of weight. Okay, so that definitely happens. And then within a month of dieting, you can notice some physical appearance changes. Notice how you feel a little bit. Within 3 months, really meaningful changes can occur. You can lose 5 to 10% of your weight and potentially your body fat. That's really, really good stuff, right? That is definitely, 5% for sure is realistic in 3 months. So that's really, really good. And the problem is some of you say, okay, well, if I diet for 6 months straight, then I'll just lose a crazy amount of weight. Well, remember, there's the dieting for too long at a time problem we described earlier. So you can't diet for years at a time without breaks. You want to take breaks every now and again that are also many months of eucaloric, isocaloric periods in which you're just at maintenance. So basically you lose fat, reach about 3 or 4 months maybe, take a maintenance phase that's another 3 or 4 months, and then lose fat again. So when lots of weight is required, 15% plus total body weight for you to lose, many phases of fat loss and maintenance are required. You can't one-shot kill it, even though it's super tempting, right? And the line there is, it didn't take you 16 weeks to gain 50 pounds, and it's not going to take you 16 weeks to lose it. So if it was that simple, that would be amazing. But it's going to take you, you can lose 50 pounds in 6 weeks or 16 weeks. It's just not going to be sustainable. You're going to balloon right up after. Almost everyone does. And if you ever skeptical of that, look up the data on the people who did the Biggest Loser challenge for TV and see how many of them are still lean. It's depressing. And that's a perfect example of a one-shot kill attempt. What's ahead? What are we doing in the next couple lectures? We got a lecture on calories and macros for fat loss, a lecture on timing, food comp, and supplements, a lecture on ranges and durations for weight loss, what the optimal vectors are there, how to measure progress, how to periodize fat loss to make sure you're getting the most out of your program in the long term sustainably, how to adjust calories, macros, timing, food comp, etc. when your diet stalls, when losses are not coming at the rate we want. And lastly, we're going to have a discussion. Lecture number 8 is myths, misconceptions, and special circumstances in fat loss. Folks, I will see you for lecture 2 next time.